Is a new rule really just about internal discipline, or is it a silent gateway to major risks that could shake Jungkook and Taehyung's future? And why does Jeff Benjamin dare to call it not a mere formality, but a barely visible ticking time bomb? That sentence is not just bait. It is an entry point into a conversation that has long whispered behind the curtains of the K-pop industry, a conversation rarely discussed honestly because it is too dangerous, too sensitive, and too close to the core of power. When Jeff Benjamin's name is mentioned, many immediately associate it with sharp analysis, deep understanding of the global market, and the courage to touch gray areas that mainstream media often avoids. And when the names Jungkook and Taehyung are pulled into a narrative about HYBE's new rules, the question is no longer what is the rule, but what is truly at stake? On the surface, new rules are always neatly packaged. Words like professionalism, artist protection, brand consistency, and long-term stability sound reassuring. Yet the modern entertainment industry, especially K-pop, is rarely that simple. Jeff Benjamin, through years of commentary and analysis, has repeatedly emphasized one thing fans often overlook: every major corporate policy carries layered consequences. Some are visible, some are deliberately hidden behind legal language, and others are only felt when the impact has already struck careers, relationships, and even artistic identity. This is where Jungkook and Taehyung stand, not as random names, but as symbols. They represent the peak of global K-pop power, two figures who do not merely sing and dance, but carry the weight of millions of expectations, massive investments, and cross-continental business strategies. Any new HYBE rule, whatever its official details may be, cannot be neutral for figures of their magnitude. And Jeff Benjamin, with his calm yet incisive analytical style, invites the public to ask, does this rule truly protect, or does it subtly restrain? The question grows more intriguing because of how the rule was introduced. There was no explosive press conference, no lengthy explanation to satisfy public curiosity. What emerged instead were fragments of information, subtle shifts felt on the surface, and muted reactions within the ecosystem. To the casual observer, this may look like routine adjustment, but to an industry analyst like Jeff Benjamin, that is precisely where danger lies. The greatest risks often arrive not with loud announcements, but with administrative silence. Jeff Benjamin is known for his ability to read the direction of international markets. When he speaks of hidden risks, he is not referring merely to contract violations or open conflict. He is pointing to something more abstract yet potentially devastating: erosion of creativity, image lock-in, and long-term tension between artists and the system that houses them. Jungkook and Taehyung, having moved beyond the phase of being new idols, are at a critical juncture in their journey. Every new rule governing their movement, expression, and decisions could determine whether they evolve as global artists or become trapped in a safe, endlessly repeated version of themselves. This is where the narrative turns emotional, not because of manufactured drama, but because the stakes are real. Jeff Benjamin has often noted that the global market is no longer satisfied with sterile perfection. The world craves honesty, imperfection, and artistic courage. Rules that are too rigid, even when framed as protection, can create distance between artists and audiences. Jungkook and Taehyung are known for their authentic aura, for spontaneous moments that feel deeply human. If HYBE's new rules, even indirectly, erode that space for spontaneity, the risk extends beyond the personal. It threatens BTS's global appeal as a cultural phenomenon. Yet there is another layer that complicates the story. HYBE is not a small company acting without calculation. Every policy is almost certainly born from extensive risk analysis. Jeff Benjamin does not accuse. Instead, he highlights the paradox. What protects the company may not protect the artist. What stabilizes the brand may not stabilize the creative soul within it. And Jungkook and Taehyung stand precisely at the center of this tug-of-war. The tension intensifies when we consider their current position. They are no longer simply group members following the current. They are individuals with personal power, cultural influence, and long-term career potential that extends beyond a single phase. A new rule, if overly restrictive, can send an implicit message that artistic freedom must be sacrificed for strategic uniformity. Jeff Benjamin sees this as a hidden risk because its effects are not immediate. It works slowly, reshaping how artists see themselves and how the world perceives them. There is also a psychological dimension rarely discussed. The pressure to always be safe can become a mental burden. Jungkook and Taehyung are known as individuals who channel emotion through art. Rules that are too rigid can create a gap between emotion and expression. Jeff Benjamin, with his background bridging Western and Eastern industries, understands how sensitive global audiences are to authenticity. The greatest risk is not scandal, but the loss of emotional resonance. What makes this story irresistibly click-worthy, yet still academic, is the question of the future. Will this new rule become a foundation that strengthens Jungkook and Taehyung's position as global icons, or will it someday be remembered as the moment when their creative path began to narrow? Jeff Benjamin offers no definitive answer, and that is his power. He plants clues, not conclusions. He urges readers to read between the lines, to notice subtle changes in public behavior, project choices, and communication styles that may seem trivial but are deeply significant. Fans' emotions inevitably become part of the equation. Every shift, no matter how small, feels personal. For many, Jungkook and Taehyung are not just artists, but reflections of life journeys, sources of inspiration, and symbols of expressive freedom. When new rules appear, anxiety is natural. Jeff Benjamin understands fandom psychology, and precisely for that reason, he is careful. He does not ignite fires without cause, but he also refuses to soothe with comforting illusions. Perhaps the greatest shock of this entire discussion is the realization that the biggest risks do not always come from the outside. Not from foreign media criticism, not from public controversy, but from internal structures overly confident in their own systems. Jeff Benjamin refers to this as a classic trap of large industries. When a company grows too fast, rules become shields. Yet those same shields can turn into walls separating artists from their natural evolution. In the context of Jungkook and Taehyung, evolution is essential. They are at an age and career phase where artistic experimentation is no longer optional, it is necessary. New rules that regulate rhythm, image, and interaction can act as subtle breaks. Not noticeable now, but perhaps painfully clear 5 or 10 years later when people ask, why did such immense potential feel restrained? This brings the article back to its opening question. Is this just a rule or something more? Jeff Benjamin, with his reputation and experience, does not speak lightly. When he raises the issue of hidden risk, it is an invitation to think critically. Not to accuse, not to create hollow drama, but to understand the complexity of the relationship between artists, corporations, and the global market. This story is not finished. HYBE's new rules are still in effect. Jungkook and Taehyung still stand on the world stage with undeniable charisma. Yet behind the glare of spotlights and roaring cheers, there is a quiet dynamic worth watching. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but someday, when we look back, this question may return to haunt us. Did we see the signs early enough, and were we brave enough to read them? And that is where the true power of Jeff Benjamin's analysis lies. He does not offer cheap sensation, but leaves an echo of questions, of clues, and of concern that feels uncomfortably real. Not just a rule, he says. And after tracing every layer of this story, it becomes hard to disagree that behind the word rule lies a risk far greater than what appears on the surface. The echo of that risk lingers, because rules in an industry like K-pop never exist in isolation. They ripple outward, touching creative decisions, public perception, and even the unspoken dynamics between artists and those who manage their trajectories. Jeff Benjamin's warning feels less like a verdict and more like a lens, one that sharpens focus on moments that might otherwise pass unnoticed. When Jungkook pauses before answering a question, when Taehyung chooses silence over spontaneity, observers begin to wonder whether these are personal choices or quiet adaptations to a system recalibrating its control. What makes this situation especially delicate is the global context. BTS, and by extension Jungkook and Taehyung, no longer operate solely within the boundaries of Korean pop culture. They exist in a transnational space where Western media values transparency, individuality, and narrative authenticity. Jeff Benjamin has often pointed out that global audiences are quick to sense when an artist's voice feels filtered. A rule that may seem logical within a corporate framework can appear constraining or even suspicious to international fans who have embraced these artists precisely because they felt real. There is also the question of timing. HYBE's new rules arrive at a moment when the industry itself is shifting. K-pop is no longer the novelty it once was in the West. It is scrutinized, analyzed, and compared to other global entertainment systems. In this environment, Jungkook and Taehyung are not just performers but case studies. How they navigate restrictions, how much freedom they retain, and how visibly they evolve will influence how future idols are perceived. Jeff Benjamin's concern hints at a broader implication. What happens to an industry when its brightest figures are subtly guided towards safety rather than exploration, emotionally? This creates a quiet tension that fans can feel but not always articulate. There is pride in seeing Jungkook and Taehyung protected by a powerful company, yet there is also fear that protection may come at the cost of risk-taking. Art, after all, thrives on risk. Jeff Benjamin's analysis suggests that the most dangerous scenario is not open rebellion or public conflict, but gradual normalization. When restrictions become routine, they stop being questioned. When artists adapt too well, the loss of freedom becomes invisible. The silence surrounding the specifics of the rules only deepens the mystery. Silence invites interpretation, and interpretation fuels speculation. Jeff Benjamin does not dismiss this as mere fandom paranoia. Instead, he frames it as a natural response to opacity. When information is limited, audiences fill the gaps. In the case of Jungkook and Taehyung, those gaps are filled with concern, hope, and a desire to protect the very qualities that made them icons in the first place. Yet, paradoxically, this uncertainty also highlights their resilience. Jungkook and Taehyung have repeatedly shown an ability to communicate emotion even within constraints. Their performances, interviews, and artistic choices often carry layers that transcend official narratives. Jeff Benjamin subtly acknowledges this strength, suggesting that true artists find ways to breathe even in confined spaces. Still, he cautions that resilience should not be mistaken for invulnerability. As the industry watches, every move becomes symbolic. A song choice, a visual concept, a moment of vulnerability on stage, all are read as signals. Are these expressions freely chosen, or carefully curated within new boundaries? Jeff Benjamin's analysis does not answer this directly, but it insists that the question itself matters. In an era where authenticity is currency, perception can shape reality. Ultimately, the story circles back to responsibility. HYBE holds responsibility as a corporation balancing profit, stability, and global reputation. Jungkook and Taehyung carry responsibility as artists whose influence reaches far beyond music charts. And observers, including critics like Jeff Benjamin, hold responsibility to question without sensationalizing, to analyze without condemning. This balance is fragile, and it is precisely why the issue feels so charged. The future remains unwritten. Rules may evolve, loosen, or be reinterpreted. Jungkook and Taehyung may find new avenues for expression that redefine what freedom looks like within structure. Or they may one day speak openly about this period, reframing it with hindsight. Until then, the risk Jeff Benjamin points to remains suspended in the air, neither fully realized nor fully dismissed. What is certain is that this is more than a procedural update. It is a moment that invites reflection on power, creativity, and trust. And as long as Jungkook and Taehyung continue to stand at the intersection of art and industry, every rule, no matter how quietly introduced, will carry a weight far heavier than its wording suggests. That weight continues to grow precisely because time has a way of revealing what initial reactions cannot. In the early stages, rules often feel abstract, almost theoretical. They live in documents, internal briefings, and carefully chosen corporate language. But as months pass, their true shape begins to emerge not through announcements, but through patterns. Jeff Benjamin's perspective encourages observers to pay attention to these patterns, because that is where intention quietly becomes impact. For Jungkook and Taehyung, impact is rarely loud. It shows itself in subtleties. A collaboration that never materializes. A creative idea hinted at but never fully realized. A shift in tone during interviews where answers become more measured, more cautious, less impulsive. None of these moments alone prove anything. Yet together, they form a narrative that invites scrutiny. Jeff Benjamin's concern is rooted in this accumulation, in the slow layering of small adjustments that eventually redefine an artist's boundaries without ever announcing that those boundaries have moved. The industry has seen this before, though rarely at this scale. Artists who begin their careers with raw intensity and unfiltered expression often find themselves, years later, polished into predictability. Not because they lack ideas, but because systems reward consistency over disruption. Jeff Benjamin does not suggest that Jungkook and Taehyung are headed inevitably toward this fate, but he warns that even the most powerful artists are not immune. Influence does not erase structure, it merely negotiates with it. What complicates the situation further is the emotional contract between artists and fans. Jungkook and Taehyung have built their connection not just through music, but through perceived honesty. Fans feel invited into their inner worlds, into moments of doubt, joys, and vulnerability. When rules appear to mediate that access, even subtly, the relationship shifts. Jeff Benjamin recognizes this as a fragile point. Fans may not know the details of any rule, but they are acutely sensitive to changes in energy. When something feels restrained, they sense it long before they can explain it. This sensitivity places enormous pressure on Jungkook and Taehyung themselves. They must navigate expectations from multiple directions at once: corporate responsibility, artistic integrity, and emotional accountability to millions of people who feel personally invested in their journey. Jeff Benjamin's analysis hints at the psychological toll of this balancing act. The risk is not burnout alone, but internal conflict, the quiet questioning of how much of oneself can be expressed without crossing invisible lines. At the same time, there is a strategic dimension that cannot be ignored. HYBE's global ambitions require predictability. Brands, partners, and markets favor stability. From that perspective, rules are not villains. They are tools. Jeff Benjamin acknowledges this reality, which is why his commentary resonates beyond fandom spaces. He speaks to a broader truth about modern entertainment. The larger the platform, the narrower the margin for perceived error. Jungkook and Taehyung operate on a stage where every action is amplified, archived, and analyzed. Rules promise control in an uncontrollable environment.